無立法效。
Members' motion with no legislative effect. Mr. Kenneth LEUNG will move a motion on formulating a comprehensive population policy. 4 members will move amendments to the motion. This council will proceed to a joint debate on the motion and the amendment. Later, I will first call upon Mr. Kenneth LEUNG to speak and move the motion. Then I will call upon Mr. Kitson Yang, Mr. Dennis Leung, Mr. Benson Look, and Ms. Eunice Yung to speak in sequence, but they may not move the amendments at this stage. The joint debate now begins. Members who wish to speak, please press the Request to Speak button. I now call upon Mr. Kenneth LEUNG to speak and move the motion. Mr. Leung. Madam Deputy, I move that the motion as printed on the agenda be passed. President Xi Jinping at the meeting earlier mentioned population policy. He said that population development is crucial to the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. There's a need to boost the quality of the population. We need high-quality population development to support our modernization. That is the Chinese path to modernization. The population is the asset of any society. We need people. We need a sustainable, steady source of people. That's how we can achieve innovation, success, prosperity, and vitality. Hong Kong is an international city, and we are an externally oriented city. We have a talent shortage, manpower shortage. We also have an aging population, falling birth rate. This is why I move this motion on formulating a comprehensive population policy. Let's put our heads together, come up with a policy on population, plan for our future growth, and for our population structure, we need steady and sustainable growth. Madam Deputy, we have an aging population and falling death rate. 20 years ago, there was a report done by the Task Force on Population. They saw the problem coming. Back then, it was a forecast, but now it has become a pressing concern. We have to face up to it. We're getting into a very much aging society. For those over 65, we have 20% of them in the population. In 2030, we will see the percentage go up to 30%. We will be the place with the longest life expectancy across the globe. Our falling birth rate is another problem. Total fertility rate at a 30-year low, 0.77. This means for women in childbearing ages, they give birth to less than 1 child. That's below the 2.1 being the natural replenishment rate. Now, our country has also seen a negative growth in its population. We want to bring in population, but that may not work given this backdrop. This is why I believe that we need to keep our fingers on the pulse of the population. We need to look for solutions. In my motion, I proposed high-level coordination, cross-departmental collaboration for our future population policy. Let's learn from what we did in the past, and we should also take a new perspective to reflect population as a long-term strategic issue. Madam Deputy, in the past, we focused on human resources. In 2015, there was a report on population policy. The government set up the Human Resources Planning Commission tasked with human resources policy. The current term government has also rolled out measures to compete for talent. For sectors with a worker shortage, the government wants to bring in imported labor, but that can only be a temporary fix. In the long run, we need to fix the population shortage and the aging population. And we need even growth. We need replenishment to the population. That's how we can stay prosperous. To do that, we need different policy measures to come together. And this is exactly what General Secretary Xi meant by high-quality population growth, and also the strategy about enhancement to the population structure. The government has said this. It's up to individuals on whether they have kids. But we need to apply strategic thinking to population. Then childbearing is a major issue for the community. We need to provide a conducive environment, and this will take government support. This is why in the motion, I propose that In areas like marriage, childbearing, parenting, education, and housing, we need to create an environment suitable for childbearing. I work with a number of groups on a survey. We surveyed roughly 1,000 young people. 63.7% of the respondents said they had no plan to have kids. For young people, they focus on their careers, their future. It's hard for them to think of starting a family and having kids. And they simply don't have time for that. To change that, to create an environment conducive to starting families and having kids, the government must drop its positive non-interventionist policy. There needs to be measures to enhance a sense of happiness, well-being, and gain for people. So how do we achieve a sustainable population growth? I believe other members will have great comments to make. Ms. Eunice Yong and I submitted our proposal to the government. In the interest of time, I will not go over the points one by one. But let me briefly touch on the practice in other places nearby. In South Korea, they also have a low birth rate to ensure sustainable population growth. The welfare department there come up with 5-year plans on ways to relieve the pressure on women. Say the fees for pregnancy are shouldered by the government. The medical fees are waived for infants below 1 year of age. There are parental leave. There are family allowances. So the support starts before the baby is born and lasts after the child is born. Look at Singapore. They have a slightly higher birth rate. They have a progressive baby bonus. For the first 2 kids, that's subsidy in the form of 11,000 Singapore dollars. And there are also child saving accounts set up by the government to help meet the expenses. Now on housing, on the HDB housing, expecting parents are given priority. Or you can look at our own country. Some years ago, there was a medium to long-term plan for young people. There was education of positive values. 2021, the NPCSC made this rule. On finances, taxes, housing, education, there are support measures to ease the pressure on the families. On childbearing and child rearing and education, we have seen a range of measures being rolled out. Parental leave, improvements to assisted birth. There are extra 2 hours of after-school childcare, 5 days a week. There are also jobs specifically for mothers looking after kids. In the mainland, they are confronted with the same problem, aging population, low birth rate. They rolled out different measures, but the goal stays the same. They put population on top of their agenda. Madam Deputy, we have an aging population, and we need to unleash a labor force. Last week, we had this motion from Dr. Johnny about the use of germ technology to improve the quality of life of the silver-haired. With an aging population, we all focus on the lives of seniors. We need to promote industries catering to the seniors. On elderly care, in the future, we need more places for elderly care, and we need to think from the perspective of seniors. Seniors care about health care, community services, and also elderly care in the GBA. I hope the government can do something on those fronts so that seniors can lead a healthy and happy life. I want to point out this. Seniors are also a source of labor force. They have experience. They can pass on that experience to younger people. The government should pay greater attention to this point. And now, human resources. We have visa students. There are more than 10,000 non-local university graduates. They cannot go work due to all kinds of restrictions. Can we relax the restrictions? That way we can supplement our labor force and we can help build up a stronger bond between them and the local population, and we can keep them here after they graduate. I will stop here and I look forward to hearing from the officials.
I now propose the above mentioned Mr. Yang Wing-kit. Thank you, Deputy President. I speak in support of Mr. Leung's motion, and we should actually try to come up with incentives to raise the birth rate. In the last couple of years, there's been a drop of population around 10,000, and it has actually undermined the workforce and has also brought along more heavy load to the medical sector. More worrying is that there is actually a 2.1% birth rate, and actually it is lower than this average because in Hong Kong it's around 0.07%. But the government continues with an encouraging but not intervening policy. Actually, in Europe, with childhood expenses taking up a higher GDP, actually the birth rate is higher, and Asia actually has one of the lowest birth rates in the world. Japan has been encouraging a birth rate, and now it has become more stable. Singapore has been commended by the United Nations for its policy, and they have around 2 children per family, and so they also have an incentive measure around 1 million Hong Kong dollars. Actually, we can see that Singaporean population has become more stable. So we can see that the government should come up with more measures to promote birth rate, because if there is actually a reduction in birth rate, then it would have a huge impact on the economy. Even South Korea, with the lowest birth rate, has been providing more subsidies, and that each family with a child can have around $3,000 to $5,000 as subsidy. And in recent years, we have seen many countries coming up with measures to enhance the birth rate, even for the mainland. During the NPC this year, there's an offer for 3-child families to have more subsidies and to try to set up more medical and insurance protection for such children, and this is actually quite forward thinking. We see a huge decrease in the birth rate because of the high cost in child rearing and for people entering late marriages. Therefore, I agree with Mr. Leung that we should come up with a suitable environment for young people to bear children and to try to overcome these obstacles of having children. The government should also provide more subsidies in the public and medical sector, and to provide help such as IVF for those above the age of 40, and to help those who are unable to have children to try for one. Well, in recent years, young people want to make sure they have housing before they get married, and then they do not want to have children. Actually, we need to focus more on economic incentives, because that is the only thing that the government can have control over, such as providing progressive incentives, that the more children you have, the more subsidies offered. And education and medical subsidies can also help lower the costs for raising children. The government should review the maternity and paternity leave, and to further step up support for families that work. We should provide with more tax concessions and incentives to provide a better environment for families to bear children. With a huge reduction in birth rate, Hong Kong has to compete for talents and to try to help enhance the workforce. We have to look into the impact brought along by the low birth rate, and I call upon the government to be more aggressive in such measures. I hope that you would support my motion. Mr. Dennis Leung. Thank you. I'd like to first thank Mr. Kenneth Leung for his motion, so that we'll be able to debate on the population policy in Hong Kong and try to come up with more opportunities in the future to ensure that there will be enough labor force to ensure sustainable development. I support Mr. Leung's original motion and support amendments raised by other members. We have seen a declining birth rate all around the world, with Hong Kong having particular serious. And in Hong Kong, each woman will bear only 0.38 child. In Africa, it's around 6.7 children per woman. And it's because people in Hong Kong get married late and they're unwilling to bear more children. Those who are willing to have children would only have very few children. Therefore, the government should come up with incentives to encourage people to bear children. There is now a lack of young population, and we have seen many problems arising from the low birth rate. There is a lack of manpower in many sectors, and some of the traditional crafts already have become obsolete due to the shortage of manpower. We have to come up with ways to change this in the long term. And as Hong Kong offers services to other countries, we have to make sure that our population does not continue to decline. When there are better job opportunities elsewhere, then the workforce will also move elsewhere. Although the government said that local people will be hired first and will have priority, sometimes it is difficult to attract people to return after they have left. I hope that the government, when they are importing labor, will first consult the labor sector. The government must set up a task force to look into the population policy. First of all, there must be better vocational training and education so that people can learn skills and other competencies other than academic skills. And we must ensure that there will be a better salary to attract more people to come over. Second, we have to provide more housing opportunities for young people. Young people should find it affordable for housing so that they will have the incentive to bear children. We need to provide hope for the next generation of young people. Only by doing that, we'll be able to ensure prosperity and stability in the future. Third, there must be support for the families, such as providing daycare for children and also daycare centers for the elderly. The government must come up with ways to release more people into the workforce, come up with family-friendly incentives, and to provide more training for those who are entering the workforce. Fourth, the government must encourage childbearing so that people would not find it difficult to afford children, such as tax concessions, and also to provide cash or non-cash incentives for families. The government must also make change to the land policies to try to control the rent in the market to ensure that there will not be any property monopoly. The government must also draw reference from income from other countries to ensure that we are on par with other countries. I hope that the young generation can also work with us to encourage childbearing. Mr. Benson, look. Madam Deputy, I'd like to first thank Mr. Kenneth Leung for moving the original motion on formulating a comprehensive population policy. I understand that we are facing a low birth rate. I hope that the government can be more forward-looking and to really come up with ways to combat the declining birth rate. According to the World Report, this year, each childbearing woman in Hong Kong has only a 0.8 child, and actually it is one of the lowest percentage in the world, followed by South Korea, Singapore, and the mainland. Mainland is around 1.2%, which is actually the first negative growth in 61 years. If we look at the number of newborns, according to the Census and Statistics Department, in 2021, there are 36,953 births in that year, and in 2021 it's 93,451. So actually, now the birth rate is only 39% of 10 years ago, showing that we're at an extremely low birth rate. President Xi in November 2nd of 2022 in his speech said that a population issue is actually a long-term and strategic problem in the country. The central government, after seeing this low birth rate, knows that it will affect the economy, society, and people's livelihood. Therefore, they have relaxed the one-child policy to 2 and now even to 3 to ensure that it could actually alleviate the low birth rate problems. Well, Hong Kong has one of the lowest birth rate in the world, and all along the government has not been intervening. With the declining birth rate, there is also a record low number of students. And in a decade or so, there would be a shortage of manpower in the workforce, and that would affect the economy and society. And a low birth rate will also have a huge impact on the aging population. By 2031, for every there would be a strong dependency ratio. So one person will be having 2 dependents, and then by then, out of every 6 people, 1 of them would be the above of age of 65 and over, and those under 14 and under would be 1.4 people. So by then, each person will need to support about 7.5 people. So we must try to come up with more incentives. For example, the tax concession, raising it by 100,000 to 130 or 10,000 to 13,000. We must provide more economic incentives. So as my colleague said, we need to encourage birth rate. In Japan, newborns will receive a one-off subsidy of around 23,000 Hong Kong dollars, and every subsequent child will enjoy a few $100s of subsidy. And in South Korea, a one-off grant of around 11,000 Hong Kong dollars will be provided. The government can also try to follow these incentives to try to provide allowances, or perhaps come up with a progressive system of providing incentives. The government can also consider providing tax concessions for those with children who are 3 or under, such as concessions for hiring domestic helpers, or to provide a 20,000 cash allowance for newborns. The population is closely related to economic development. I hope that the government will take this seriously and continue to dive deep down into long-term population policies. I so speak and support the motion.
Ms. Eunice Yeung. Madam Deputy, I thank Mr. Kenneth Leung for his motion on population policy. Population is a key part of our future development. It's important for boosting our quality of life. The policy will also help ensure the personal development and tie in with society's development. It covers a wide range of areas. We need comprehensive population policy so that we can have centralized coordination. to meet the challenges associated with population development. With Mr. Kenneth LEUNG, we came up with a report with proposals. We submitted this proposal to the government. The proposal covers employment, population, retirement, elderly care. My amendment touches on these areas, hoping that the government can adopt in-depth policies. On all measures, the government will need accurate data. This means the government needs to keep assessing and reviewing and predicting where things will be going. You need data, and then you can have targeted policy. The last population policy was released in January 2015. That's the population policy strategies and initiatives. It's 8 years since. Some of the content is no longer up to date, and it's overdue for an update. We have had COVID, and then we have seen the social incidents. So now we need a complete overhaul to what we have. The key word here is sustained. You need a sustained review of social developments. The government needs to keep releasing reports, and that's how we can identify the issues coming out of an aging population. Let me first start by childbearing. It's a question of whether people dare to have kids. We all know we have a very low birth rate. Now, if the government sticks to its stance and non-interventionist policy, we will see a worsening population problem. Mr. Kenneth LEUNG and I did surveys. It's not about reluctance. Young people were constrained by other factors. First, lack of housing units, small homes. That's why the original motion mentions we need a suitable social environment for young people to start families. Housing alone will not fix it. We also need something else. We need family-friendly policies, child care, after-school daycare. Now, young couple have to work. Both parents work. So you need child care, after-school care, because the parents have no time to look after their kids. And because of that, couples are reluctant to have kids. So we need other pronatalist policies. Under the 14th Five-Year Plan, there is this reference to in creating stronger impetus for growth. We have to develop into the 8 centers. So we need to first find out the kind of talent we want and adjust our education policies accordingly. Now, Greater Bay Area development, that's our strategy. We also have the Northern Metropolis coming up with the focus on INT. We also need to integrate into national development. But do we have the talent for INT? Do we have enough talent? That's why in my amendment, I mentioned that we need to improve the implementation details of STEAM education. The schools plan their education on their own. So we have vague guidelines. Teachers lack the experience. They don't have enough resources. And that hurts the progress of schools and students. So the Education Bureau needs to come up with a centralized curriculum for STEAM education. We need guidelines for schools to follow. We need to introduce artificial intelligence in the education, get students interested in the area. We need to build a solid foundation in this area. The government also needs to strengthen VPAT of vocational and professional education and training. We used to focus too much on academics while neglecting occupational skills. That need to change. Last week, we talked about germ technology in elderly care. This shows technology has a key role to play here. So we hope the government can help seniors achieve self-enhancement, get them to serve as volunteers, etc. Finally, I want to stress that any policy has to be based on actual circumstances and data. So in formulating a comprehensive population policy, the government needs to keep assessing the situation, study the situation, have timely adjustments to the policy, improve people's quality of lives, and plan ahead for future developments. President, so submit, and I urge members to support my amendments. Secretary for Labour and Welfare.
Thank you, Madam Deputy. I'm grateful to Mr. Kenneth LEUNG for moving the motion in relation to the implementation or formulating a comprehensive population policy. I'm grateful to Mr. Yang Wing-kit, Dennis Leung, Benson Luke, and Ms. Eunice Young for moving amendments so that we can express opinions and we can find ways to resolve the problems arising from the population challenge. The population policy covers many policy areas and policy bureaus like economic development, education and training, housing supply, labor and welfare, as well as immigration policies. Having consulted the policy bureaus and upon coordination, I reply on behalf of the administration. To assist your debate, allow me to have a brief word on the work of population policy and the progress. And then I will briefly talk about the priorities in relation to this field on the part of the current administration. Mr. C.Y. LEUNG proposed a population policy electoral platform, and during his fourth-term government, in order to drive the population policy, which is an important task, the government in December 2012 reconstituted the Steering Committee on Population Policy under the chairmanship of the CS4A, and non-official members from different professional backgrounds were invited to join so as to assist the administration in absorbing diverse views. And the members helped the administration in preparing for and following up on the public consultation activities. Later on, in 2015, the population policy strategies and initiatives was promulgated. The aim of the policy is as follows: to develop and nurture a population that will continuously support and drive Hong Kong's social and economic development as Asia's world city, and to engender a socially inclusive and cohesive society that allows individuals to realize their potential, with a view to attaining quality life for all residents and families. 50 specific measures were listed in their action plan, and as far as the population policy was concerned, we focus on implementing the policies and measures introduced. When the fourth-term administration came the end of the term in June 2017, the relevant policy bureaus and departments had already implemented all the measures promulgated in the report, and the steering committee was disbanded. We are still rolling out the measures therein, and the policy bureaus will make timely adjustments in the light of the effectiveness and detailed implementation of the policies and initiatives. As Mr. Leung, in the wording of his motion, has mentioned, population policy covers many areas like sustainable development, releasing the labor potential, enhancing the quality of locally nurtured talents, attracting outside talents, providing a facilitating environment to raise a family, and manpower development and planning would be a very important part. It will impact upon the sustainability of our future development. And the decisive factor would be whether we've got adequate talents to meet the market demands. The current term government is actively coping with the fall in the labor force as well as labor shortages across the board. The CE, in his first policy address, decisively came up with a number of measures to enhance our human resources planning. We will be proactive in attracting talents and enrich our local talent pool so as to meet the future social and economic development needs. Upon the constitution of the government, the Labor and Welfare Bureau is responsible for this work, while the CS4A takes up high-level supervision and cross-bureaus collaboration. Individual bureaus will look at their own portfolios in the light of the 2015 population policy measures. In relation to marriage, childbearing, education, employment, housing, policy bureaus will be rolling out their own programs, and this will cover marital and family harmony, family-friendly measures, and child-bearing favorable environments. The government will also provide assistance to parents in raising their children, enhancing childcare services, supporting families in taking care of newborn babies, and asking employers to provide family-friendly environment. The Family Council has also been advocating core family values, and we have been enhancing the child tax allowance. There will be daycare services and after-school care, and we have the statutory paternal leave and maternity leave. The motion is also concerned about career and life planning on the part of young people, as well as whole person development. And we should have a good environment for young people to form a family. In the light of this, the Home and Youth Affairs Bureau in December last year promulgated the Youth Development Bureau blueprint with 160 specific measures to take care of children, young people of different backgrounds and age groups. On different occasions, we have been talking about ways to enhance fertility rate, manpower demands, and youth development. Together with the Secretary for Home and Youth Affairs, we'll listen carefully to the views and then we'll come back with a reply. Thank you.
Mr. Ronnick Chen, Madam Deputy, human resources are a key source of growth for our future, and this is also our recipe for success. For population policy is like the stem, and then it branches off into policies supported by various policy bureaus. They come together to meet our society's needs. We need a sustainable population policy. This matters for our economy. This also means equality of opportunities for people. People want a good living environment, and that's how we meet their need. We had 7.29 million people, and then it went up. But then in the 3 years since, the population dropped. 7.33 million by the end of 2022. First, COVID. There were control measures. The boundary was closed. There was a sharp drop in the people coming in, and then there are people leaving due to work arrangements. For those who have left, they stayed overseas due to COVID, and then for places like the UK, Australia, Canada, they relaxed their immigration pathways. So we had a net outflow of people at a record high of 185,000 people. Third, a falling birth rate and a rising mortality rate. So we saw a drop in the population. Over the past few years, we had a drop of more than 100,000 people. That's a record high in 60 years. So that dealt a blow to our society. We need people come together to make things work. When people leave, things fail. Now, the government has launched measures to attract talent. This goes to show what the problem is. We need a comprehensive population policy, and that's a pressing matter. First, teachers, nurses, they have emigrated. In 2021, the Department of Health and the Hospital Authority had a much smaller number of doctors and nurses, and then at the same time, we lost more than 4,000 teachers. We have fewer nurses, fewer teachers. They affected the operation of hospitals and schools. The government needs to take targeted measures to bring in the professionals we urgently need. For example, healthcare workers from the mainland to meet local healthcare needs. We need to plug the gap. We also need proactive policies to bring in talents, such as tech talent. The 14th Five-Year Plan encourages Hong Kong to stick to our areas of strength and also shows support for our development into an international INT center. We still have a lot of work to do to get there. Now, we have launched a Top Talent Pass scheme and also the Hong Kong Talent Engage, but we have to pick up the pace. We need to look into ways to bring in talent. For example, we need talent, international talent in tech to come here so for us to lay a solid foundation in INT. Now, on youth policy, rising home prices, rising cost of living, a slow growth in wages, these affected the desire of young people to stay here and the confidence in this place. So we need to help them with the problems of studies and career. The government needs to take a range of measures to help young people, including, first, we need to promote culture and sports, arts and culture industries, unleash their creative energy, and also enrich their lives in their off hours. And we also need more subsidies, tax breaks for those starting a family. That's how we can reassure them to stay here and develop here. Now, on pronatalist policies, a higher tax break for childcare and cash subsidies, these measures will have a limited effect. What matters is that we need a massive boost to housing supply. We need to build homes more quickly, provide better living environment. For young people who want to start families, we need to help them meet their needs, and that's how we can actually encourage childbearing. I thank Mr. Kenneth LEUNG for his motion. He urges the government to adopt high-level coordination and cross-bureau collaboration to come up with a comprehensive population policy to ensure we have a sustainable population structure. That way, at the individual level, we can ensure the quality of life of people, and at the aggregate level, we can ensure the future development of our city. We need a sustainable growth in the population, and then Hong Kong can remain an international city in Asia and create an inclusive and cohesive society. President, I support the original motion and all the amendments that so submit. Mr. Chen Xiu-hong. Madam Deputy, I speak in support of Mr. Kenneth Leung's motion on formulating a comprehensive population policy. I also support all the amendments. We have an aging population and a falling birth rate. There's also a wave of immigration. This leads to a shrinking labor force and a rising dependency ratio. We have dysfunctional population structure that slows down our economic growth. We have a rapidly aging population that also leads to rising costs in healthcare. This also has implications for our financial sustainability. We need a long-term, forward-thinking population policy to ensure sustainable population structure. This is a duty for the government. We have an aging population, a falling birth rate. We have talked about it over and over, but after so many years of work, the government is still dragging its feet, and there is no comprehensive plan to fix it. And we see a regression. In 2015, there was a population strategy, initiatives, and policy. And then in 2017, the steering committee on population policy was disbanded. Now, population policy falls under the Labor and Welfare Bureau. It's under the Human Resources Planning Commission. The fact is that population policy touches on pretty much all policy bureaus. And you have just the late Secretary for Labor and Welfare on it. And given the silos, I'm doubtful that will work. So we proposed setting up a subcommittee on population policy. I hope the government can take a targeted approach, have a full review of Hong Kong's population structure. We need the short-term, medium-term, and long-term measures to meet the challenges from Hong Kong's aging population. Now, we are in a rapidly aging society. Based on the 2020 to 2069 population forecast for our seniors, they will go up from 1.32 million in 2019 to 2.5 million or so in 2069. More alarmingly, when we have more than 2.5 million seniors, that will stay for 30 years. Meanwhile, we have a low birth rate for those below 15. We had 12.2% in 2019. They will drop to 7.6% in 2069. The stats show that as we see this aging population and a shrinking labor force, we will see a labor shortage. In the long run, that will hold back our economy and hurt our competitiveness. The pressing matter is that the Construction Industry Council foresaw a shortfall of workers in 2027 of 55,000. There are hiring difficulties across all sectors. In 2027, the forecast is that in Hong Kong as a whole, we will see a shortage of workers. The shortfall will be 170,000 workers at all levels of education attainment. I commend the government's work in attracting talent from different places and also the priority to our local workers and bringing in imported workers. We need to attract talent. We also need to keep our talent and train up talent. We need to develop this talent hub. We need to give effect to the spirit of a 20th Party Congress. We need to establish talent hub and work with the other cities of the GBA, create this talent hub and get talent to come here and go around in the GBA and meet the talent gap. There's new technology is a global phenomenon, and they can be a source of impetus for our growth. We need all kinds of tech talent. We need to develop into the 8 centers under the 14th five-year plan, and we need to have a wide range of human resources, and that's the key of the process. The government needs to take seriously INT, which is a trend, and accordingly, we need to nurture the kind of talent to meet this trend. AI is developing rapidly. It's revolutionizing the world. I agree with Mr. Eunice Jung's point that we need to have education on artificial intelligence. That way, young people can grow in a way that meets the community's needs. It's the era of artificial intelligence. Our industrial structures, our economy will see huge changes, and there will also be opportunities for transformation. The government needs to plan ahead, show forward thinking, and quickly go ahead with AI education to prepare for AI. This can also help young people prepare for their future. Hong Kong people are living longer, and we have a falling birth rate. So the way out is to encourage childbearing, increase housing supply, get seniors to work, promote geriatric technology. In the short term, we need some imported labor. I hope the government can also break new ground in policy, promote elderly care in the rest of GBA, improve retirement life for seniors. I so submit. Ms. Judy Chen. Thank you, Madam Deputy. A change in the population structure. This has implications for education, healthcare, social insurance, public finance, and the implications are huge. The population growth matters for our future competitiveness and our sustainable development. So I speak in support of Mr. Kenneth Leung's motion and also the other members' amendment. Madam Deputy, the Lausanne Institute, IMD from Switzerland, released a ranking report last December. Out of 63 major economies, Hong Kong ranked 14th. We dropped by 3 ranks from 2021. The report says, in terms of attracting talent and retaining talent and also costs of living, we ranked 60th. This shows the high costs of living here and also the high housing costs, which is a major burden. And we need to fix this in order to make us more attractive to talent. Despite that, we can see that the current term government has done a lot in terms of bringing in enterprises and talent. To boost our competitiveness, we have set up the OASIS, Office of Attracting Strategic Enterprises, Hong Kong Talent Engage. These are measures to bring in business opportunities and talent. And there's community-wide support for these moves. We believe the government will do its best to meet these goals. Since the handover, our government have done only 2 review reports on population policy. The last review was in 2015. That's more than 8 years. Since then, we have had 3 years of COVID in between. For many families, COVID was a heavy blow. For various reasons, people decided to delay childbearing. We now see a falling birth rate and an aging population. Social problems have come up and they're becoming more obvious. Last week, we had a motion debate on the use of geriatric technology. We wanted to look for ways to help seniors with elderly care and on matters of aging in place. These were the points of concern to us. Due to all these social factors, and these are all causes of concern, for that, the government needs to treat long-term population planning as a matter of urgency. There are all kinds of social changes, and there's a huge difference between what we have now and the forecast back then. So the government needs a new population review report. The government needs to take a strategic approach and a targeted approach in rising to the population crisis that's unfolding. Madam Deputy, women go through pregnancy. They bring new members to the family and the community. Every day, women are confronted with new challenges. 280 days of pregnancy. They make choices. The choices involve life planning. Giving birth is up to individual families. But for that decision, why is that becoming tougher for families? The reason is we don't have childbearing friendly policies in the community. We don't have the policy support. So I hope the government, in formulating population policies, can consider the following. So for reproductive technologies, can we have subsidies, or can the government think of ways, pronatalist policies or more tax breaks, allowances for childbearing? These options should be considered. in terms of family-friendly policies, the government should also dig deeper, find out the problems confronting women, remove barriers, so that women can be assured and go ahead to rise to challenges. And for pregnant women, they can stay competitiveness and productive and contribute to society's development. I so submit. Thank you.
Next, Mr. Jovi Chen. Thank you, Madam Deputy. I'm grateful to Mr. Leung for moving the motion. I'm the youngest female member. Well, this isn't just a motion for young people, but also a motion for the population at large. I think we're also speaking for our own generation as well. Well, in the year 2021, it was said that it would be very difficult to sort of come up with a population policy behind closed doors. Well, I think it is concerning. According to the latest UN figures covering the world, Hong Kong has the lowest fertility rate. For every woman, we have only got 0.8 babies born. In other words, on average, we don't have a baby born to a woman. I think we need to reflect upon ourselves. If we, as a society, age even worse, then it will be too late for us to come up with a comprehensive population policy. Well, in life, birth, death, getting old, getting sick are the issues that we face with. We have to look at whether our educational system brings a happy life, childhood to our students, whether parents do not have to worry or not, whether we can cope. Last night, there was a complaint about our healthcare system. People have to go across districts to seek help. Well, the FTU had a survey. 70% of the interviewees were elderly people. They had problems with their toothache, but then they were not able to afford the expensive medical bills. In other words, they don't have a decent retirement life. So we haven't given people sufficient confidence. Therefore, couples dare not raise a family, don't want to have children. I like children, but then my peers told me about their experience of child rearing as well as their experience. Having heard them, heard their stories, I am a bit worried. While you are being pregnant, then you have to plan for the primary school that your children will go to. You even have to make changes to the place that you live. If you are just a couple, then you can live in a subdivided unit. You can rent a place. But then when you have a child, then you want to have a more settled life. Now, for a child in a family, you can barely meet. But then with a 2-room flat. But then if you need 3 rooms for 2 kids, then it will cost you more than $10 million. This is indeed beyond our reach. Therefore, you won't consider making your child live with you in a subdivided unit. So in order to help our children to grow up happily, we have done some research. Tomorrow we are going to publish it. And then Lei Lai San, our first gold medalist, in an advertisement talked about requiring $4 million to raise a child. I think today the figure is much more than that. Now I move on to another topic. That is Japan has got 1.3% as their fertility rate, but we have an even lower one, 0.7, 0.8. For 30 years, the Japanese government launched many initiatives. In the year 1991, they had a piece of legislation to allow husbands to have paternity leave. So much earlier than Hong Kong. It was only in the year 2015 that we introduced this thing. In 1994, incentives. And then in the year 2004, they had a special minister to look at the falling number of young people in the society. In the Scandinavian countries, I think Finland for 10 years had seen a drop in the birth rate. Now the trend has reversed. In 2021, there was a double-digit growth. For the married couples, I think having listened to our debate today will probably be more put off. But I hope the government's reply will instill more confidence in us, in particular lawmakers in this chamber. For those who have already given birth to one, consider having a second one. And for those who are yet to become mothers, become a mother. Mr. Adrian Ho, I speak in support of the motion as well as the proposed amendments. We have economic development. We're supposed to bring a better life to our citizens, but then there are lurking problems. We are facing a demographic problem. In February this year, there was a monthly digest issued by the Census and Statistics Department. We've seen a falling trend in the birth rates. In year 2021, for every 1,000 women, we have 772 live births, compared with 1,281 in the year 1991, a fall of 40%. And then the UN figures again told us that we were second last in terms of our fertility rate. On average, 0.8 babies per woman, 1.1 in Macau, higher than us. So what has happened? What brings us to such a state? Well, in Hong Kong, competition in the job market is getting more and more intensive. So many people would rather give priority to their career development, and they get married late, and they will push back the age of rearing a child. So women may miss their golden age to bear a child, and that would affect the fertility rate. Earlier on, in relation to assisted technology, we have asked for assistance to be given to the infertile couples so that they can have their eggs stored and they can have IVF, so that we can ease the pressure on the public sector, and then they can go to the private market. Public education should be enhanced so that young people could be given guidance in relation to developing a family. They should put equal emphasis on family and career. And then the cost of raising a family will affect our tendency to raise a family. Many years ago, Ms. Li Lai-san told us that it would take us $4 million to raise a child, and it is a message embedded in our memory. And earlier on, a survey told us that there are 3 factors affecting the decision: the pressure, the economic consideration, as well as the question of housing. In Singapore, for the first 2 children, the couple would get 59,000 Hong Kong dollars equivalent. And then for the 3rd child and onwards, it will increase to $77,000. And then in August this year, those who are not yet 40 years old, and if you want to buy a public housing flat, you will be given priority, and you will have an enhanced chance to be allotted a flat. For South Korea in 2021, I know that they have got a community for newlywed couples as well as new families, and they will have the rent cut down by 50% if you have a child, and then 100% waiver for two kid families as long as 10 years. I think it is much better than the arrangements in Hong Kong. Now, we want to have a social environment that would be favorable for young people to consider raising a family. I think we also need to take care of the needs of the sandwich class. Make sure that you provide sufficient assistance to housing. Have a proper housing ladder so that when people plan to have a family, they know what they have been planned for them. There should be good after-school care, and then couples will find it easier to raise a family. While we want to have economic development, we want to have better per capita GDP. The government has come up with many initiatives, but at the same time, we need to have social sustainability. You have to enhance people's sense of happiness. I think we should have a we should go back to the days when we used to have a happy and healthy demographic structure. Mr. Leung, well, with a falling birth rate, the latest figure is that the fertility rate is 0.8%. In other words, for every woman, the average number of babies born is only 0.8. In year 2021, for every 5 persons, we have one age 60 or above. I think the aging problem would aggravate, and there would be fewer and fewer young people. The aging population will have far-reaching effects on all sorts of policies. The government has increased the tax allowance for children, more childcare services, paternity leave, and more statutory maternity leave. But still, the birth rate cannot go up, and it is not a problem that we can address overnight. Of course, there are many factors affecting the choice to have children, to raise the birth rate, economic factors, healthcare, education, housing are all areas that we have to provide a favorable environment. Aging and having fewer younger people are issues faced by many advanced economies around the world. They have come up with similar measures, but most of them are not generating satisfactory results. I asked the members of my staff, and in fact, people are getting more and more educated, and they have come up with knowledge about different views and knowledges, and they want to be free, and they don't want to be bound by traditional ideas of having children. I want to say that young people have changed their ideas, and I don't think the young would be persuaded to change their decisions just because of government measures. But then there are others who want to raise a family, but then they have to refrain from doing so because of the harsh environment. So I think we need to respect the choice of those who have already made up their mind not to have children. Now, a word on the sustainability of our population structure. I think we need to take into account the policy on talents. I think we need to attract more people to come, and we should also nurture our local people. We should attract more people to come to Hong Kong, to settle down, to work here. We have lost over 100,000 people for the past few years. Many of them are young. We need to attract talents to come to Hong Kong. This is a quick way to fill the gap. The government has got the Top Talent Pass scheme, and the government has also got the Hong Kong Engage office. This is good. They have to be enhanced in the light of the reality. After attracting the talents, we need to keep the talents. I understand that for those who come under the various immigration schemes, not all of them would become permanent residents after staying here for 7 years. In other words, they are not interested to stay here for a long period of time. So we have to give consideration to that, and we must come up with a targeted solution. There should be incentives, and there should be a better planning. We need to provide an environment that is inclusive and comfortable, and then they will be happy to stay here, and they will have a sense of belongingness. And then nurturing our local talents would be important to fill the manpower gap. We must improve our STEAM education. Professional and vocational education should be emphasized. We must make sure that the new generation would believe that there is a prospect, a bright future for them to stay in Hong Kong, to live and work here. So I spoke in support of Mr. Leung's motion as well as the other proposed amendments.
Ms. Carmen Ken. Madam Deputy, I speak in support of Mr. Kenneth Leung's motion on formulating a comprehensive population policy. Population is very important to an economic development. The 30th NPC Chapter 9 points out that optimizing a population policy and encouraging childbirth and reducing expenses on childbirth and child rearing will be the main focus. This shows that the mainland has attached huge importance to population. Hong Kong also faces these problems. We see an aging population and low birth rate, and that has brought along huge implications on the society. The government must attach more importance to the challenges faced. Last year, I asked an oral question on population policy, and G19 also advocated to the government to review its population policy. We're happy to see that the administration has come up with a series of measures to promote and attract talents. But how about for population? I agree that there are many rising challenges, but then population policy is also very important. I also want to point out that even though we look into the short-term policy, we also need to set out a long-term population policy. As the CE said, when we set out the policies, we must also include short, mid, and long-term measures to ensure that it can bring positive impact to the society. I would like to suggest 3 short, mid, and long-term measures. In the short run, we should focus on migration. We should attract people to move into Hong Kong. It can meet the shortfall of manpower, and if they stay behind to become permanent residents, it can also optimize the population structure. It can also meet the policy for trawling for talents. The government also has policy in retaining talents. For example, on the IANG in allowing students to stay behind after graduation. And can we actually, based on such circumstances, try to extend the period for over 12 months? This is a short-term policy. And we should also set out a good birth rate policy. It should not only rely on a person's decision. As Mr. Leung said, we should actually help young people to encourage them to bear children, to raise children. And this is not something we can achieve in the short term. We must look into the mid and long run. I suggest the government to come up with incentives such as progressive tax concessions and family-friendly recruitment measures to step-by-step enhance the number of statutory holidays and to try to support young people to reduce their cost in raising a family. Thirdly, setting a comprehensive population policy must be far-reaching and forward-looking. Since 2017, we have now looked into the Steering Committee on Population. As we saw, we now look into the economic development. Actually, 3 task forces has already been set up by the government, and members come from different walks of life, from different professions. I hope that the government can seek the advice of professionals to explore and look into a better population policy to meet the needs of Hong Kong. I would like to reiterate that population and talent policies should not be combined. We understand that the government hopes to attract more talents, but then the government must also respond positively to the motion and amendments on formulating a comprehensive population policy. I so speak, and I speak in support of the original motion. Mr. Yu Pak Leung, thank you. I support Mr. Kenneth Leung's original motion on formulating a comprehensive population policy. We see a new low in birth rate, and with the pandemic, we have seen actually a declining trend in our labor. We see that we must try to focus on the 8 main points raised by the central authorities. According to the 2019 financial report, every year we see a GDP increase of 3.8% and 1.2% come from the increase in labor force, and 2.2% come from the productive labor force. And so we can see that many problems in labor shortage has been seen, and we have heard from different sectors that it is very difficult to hire people at the moment. What the government has promoted so far actually does not really resolve the root of the problem. We must try to think of long-term policies to really treat the rooted problems. First of all, in terms of population policy, it must be steered and led by high-level government to ensure that Hong Kong will have enough manpower. There must be a comprehensive policy to encourage childbirth and to attract more people to move to Hong Kong to ensure that we'll be able to meet the shortfall of the labor shortage. And so we will need different policies in housing, education, and so it must be a high-level policy, and through different steering and monitoring, be able to resolve the issue. So the CE has set up a population policy, the steering committee on population policy, and I believe that childbirth is actually a personal decision. Even though the government can encourage people, it cannot change the mindset of the young people. We must try to support families, such as providing better child care and providing more maternity and paternity leave, or to provide cash or non-cash allowances. I agree with all these amendments raised by members. These family-friendly incentives can encourage childbirth for those families that are still hesitating. Maybe these policies could encourage them to bear children. But for those who refuse to have children, these policies might not actually have a very large effect. In the long run, we should still try to attract more people to move into Hong Kong. The government must try to compete for talents, and on the premise of safeguarding local labor, also introduce or import labor to ensure that we will have enough manpower. It is very important to attract more people to come into Hong Kong, more talents to come to Hong Kong. But first, we must ensure that people would feel welcome. We have to become a more inclusive society, so that people will view Hong Kong as their home, and that they would also have a sense of belonging and treat Hong Kong as their home. The Hong Kong and people must work together on this. I so speak supporting the original motion and the amendments. Reverend Kenneth Peter Kuhn. Well, with the recovery of the economy, all the sectors are now hiring people to fill up their shortage of manpower. But then we see that there is a lack of manpower in all sectors. And many sectors are facing a huge shortage with aging population and declining birth rate, and also people emigrating. We see that this problem has become more serious. Some people object to the import of labor, as it could actually take away the work of locals. But then actually, without sufficient manpower, it can actually affect the economy. A lack of manpower will bring along a chain effect. The income may actually rise, but then there will not be enough people. Productivity will not increase, and enterprises continue to face high operation cost. And ultimately, there would be inflation. Things would just become more expensive, and it will be more of a financial burden to all. And some businesses would just choose to reduce their or downscale and maybe to shorten their business hours. So this is all a vicious cycle because those most affected would be the employees. We're now already in dire straits. The government should not delay any longer. And we should actually target the import of labor in certain industries. And this is the reality that we face. Importing labor is seen as a monster, but then is it really that scary? Let's compare with Singapore. Singapore's economic development has been on the rise based on two main factors. First of all, they have huge land reclamation, reducing land cost, and secondly, they import a large number of laborers to meet the shortfall. There are 5.6 million people in Singapore, and non-permanent residents are about 1.57 million. So you can see that imported labor take about 28% of the population. As there is less of a labor bottleneck in Singapore, even though the population is lower than us, the per capita GPT is actually higher than ours. The total GDP is around 466 billion US dollars, and Hong Kong's total GDP is 360 million US dollars, and per capita GDP is only around $4,000. Although this is not a one-to-one comparison with Singapore, at least we know that the import of labor will not actually drag down the income of local laborers. Instead, it can in economic downturn can really affect the local income. We must come up with a policy in import of labor to meet the manpower shortage. There's been 8 years in which we don't have a comprehensive population policy. The government should set up a high steering committee to look into the industry changes and try to cater to the new needs to set forward-looking population policies and support to ensure that we'll be able to meet the upcoming needs and development. We must also ensure that we'll be able to ride on the opportunities brought along by the mainland's development. I so speak in support of the motion and the amendments.
Mr. Rock Chen. Madam Deputy, we have a falling birth rate and a wave of immigration. Over the past couple of years, our labor population shrank by more than 100,000 people. The Labor and Welfare Bureau released its population forecast 2027. By 2027, we will see a shortfall in the labor force by 170,000 people. People are the main source of growth for our economy. I speak in support of Mr. Kenneth LEUNG's motion. I agree that the government needs high-level coordination and cross-departmental collaboration to come up with that population policy. The last population policy report was released in 2015. That's 8 years ago. We need a timetable and a roadmap quickly. We need to consider society's needs, bring in talent, keep our existing talent, and also nurture talent. This is how we can ensure we have a sustainable population structure. An international outlook is our edge. To stay competitive, we will need to nurture and attract outstanding young talent. Young talent wants a place where they can give full play to their strengths. Hong Kong is an international financial center. But what about our other industries? We are less competitive in the other industries. The government needs to support industries, come up with an industrial policy, roll out tax and land concessions, streamline visa procedures, bring in firms and talent. The government needs to bring back overseas Chinese. Given the geopolitical tensions between the US and China, there is this forum that says 2021, more than 1,400 Chinese scientists in the US returned to China, up 22% from the year before. Hong Kong is the most open and internationalized city of China. We're also part of the Greater Bay Area. We will be an attractive option for these overseas Chinese scientists. We should bring them here, let them give full play to their strengths here. We need to attract and nurture future talent. We have 5 universities in the top 100 across the globe. The government should make good use of our strength in education. Now, without worsening the competition for university admission for local students, we need more scholarships, stipends, bring in more mainland and overseas university talents here. After bringing in outside talent, we also need to keep local talent. That's how we can fix the population issue. We have housing issues, homes are too small. The government needs to create a social environment conducive to starting a family for young talent. This means working on housing and urban planning to create a better living environment, larger spaces for people. For those on full scholarship, we can impose an additional condition. After they graduate, they have to work in Hong Kong from 1 year and up to 2 years. Get them to try to live here and work here. If they like here, they can put down roots here, start a family. Another thing the government can consider is to boost the local population. In Singapore, they have pronatalist policies. There are baby bonuses, nearly 60,000 Hong Kong dollars. We can learn from Singapore. Have a fund dedicated to bring up children, increase the tax breaks for children. We can also provide greater subsidies for assisted reproduction. At the same time, we need to further unleash the female labor force. For public and private firms, they need to roll out women-friendly, family-friendly policies such as community childcare, flexible work hours. That way, women can come back to the workforce. For our future development, we need to nurture local talent. This means for the government, we need to diversify our industries. We can automatize our assembly lines, introduce smart technologies. With artificial intelligence and robotics, we need to enhance our production. This can boost greater work efficiency and make the work more interesting, give young people more career options. We also need to strengthen life planning and vocational and professional education and training. On-the-job training is needed for those in-service practitioners. That way, young people can plan ahead. President, I so submit. I support the motion and all the amendments. Thank you. Mr. Andrew Lam. Madam Deputy, I thank Mr. Kenneth LEUNG for his motion. We have an aging population, falling birth rate, a shrinking labor force. These demographic changes have far-reaching implications for the society and the economy. This is common to all developed economies. Hong Kong is no exception. We are coming up with ways to devise a suitable population policy to fix this. Before we talk about that, let's talk about the direction. And let's first find out where we stand. We are a top-notch international financial center. The 14th Five-Year Plan has 8 centers in mind for Hong Kong. We need to create stronger impetus for growth. And this is what our new population policy should be centered on. We need a solid economy to have a caring society. Our country lifted 800 million people out of poverty. So to support our young people and our seniors, we need to boost our competitiveness. This means we need to be targeted in nurturing talent and create this talent hub. Developing the economy means we need high-end talent and also manpower. We need both quantity and quality. We have to face up to the short-term, medium-term, and long-term problems, and we need to be mindful of the differences in various options. Education and training are vital, and there are ways to help us build up a solid foundation. But then we cannot fix problems quickly with that approach. We have a talent and staff shortage. We cannot rely on medium to long-term measures alone. Now, as an international city, we have our appeals, but the costs of living are high, and that's something that puts people off. We need manpower and talent. At the same time, we encourage young people to go to the other parts of the country, and we also get seniors to seek elderly care in the GBA. So we need to set certain things clear. It's a digital era. There's a 1-hour living circle. People working in Hong Kong do not have to live inside Hong Kong. The competitiveness of international cities is the mobility of the people. In the outline development plan of the GBA, we need talent to flow between places and sectors. In the GBA, we need talent to flow between different parts of the GBA. There's a global scramble for talent. For any GBA city, they have to be part of the process. When we say bringing in talent, we should not be focused on the region alone. In Guangdong province, it ranks very high in terms of birth rate, and there's a growing labor force in the GBA as a whole. In Hong Kong, we have an edge in education and the pay we offer. So we need to complement the other cities in the GBA in terms of the advantages. We need to remove barriers that a hurdle in the flow of people in the GBA. We need a GBA-wide talent flow. And it's not like we are abandoning seniors like that Japanese movie. We cannot just be exporting our seniors and young people. We need to work with other GBA cities, create the conditions, narrow the differences between Hong Kong and the other GBA cities, and create a livable environment for people to study and live. And people should be given a choice as to where they work and live. And one area we should focus is to promote the emerging industries, create a greater diversity of job opportunities, boost the competitiveness of the GBA. We need to retain talent too. Aging population, falling birth rate. This means the government needs to be more aggressive and proactive in its population policy. We need to combine that with the potential of the GBA. We need to strengthen our capacity, give full play to the advantages of one country, two systems, and strengthen our appeal for outside talent so that we can lay a solid foundation for this take off with the rest of the GBA and provide a guarantee for long-term growth of the GBA. President also submitted support the original motion and the amendments from the 4 members.
Mr. Chen Kin-po, thank you, Madam Deputy. I have to thank Kenneth LEUNG for moving such an important motion. Since the year 2020, we have seen a fall in the population size. This is attributed to many reasons. I think in order to address the issue, we are considering importation of foreign labor and will try to have capital investment immigration schemes. Last year, only 30,000 babies were born, a record low. I think it is already a very imminent and critical problem. The government must come up with a long-term strategic solution so as to reverse the falling trend. Otherwise, 10 years down the road, there will be many problems. We had 95,000 births many years ago. Now it is 36,000. The pandemic is, of course, behind the reason for the exceptionally low birth rates in the past 2 years. More and more people don't want to have babies. Well, according to a survey, many people told us that they would not want to raise a family. Pressure, too busy, lack of housing, etc., etc. There are other reasons as well. This is because with the emergence of AI, a lot of jobs will be replaced and young people are worried about their job prospect. They are also worried about the future of their children. And then parents are saying that children would rather play games on their consoles, and then parents are saying that it is difficult to take care of their children. So many people are discouraged from raising a family. So in the short term, the birth rate is likely to stay at a low level. The government has been saying that it's an important family decision. the government will come up with a favorable environment and a family-friendly environment. There shouldn't be over-intervention. This is outdated. It's high time for the government to rethink. For population policies, I think what is important is to make sure that there will be quality labor. The government is considering importation of labor. You have my support. But then this is only a case of expediency. They are transient. They won't stay in Hong Kong. The government is attracting professionals and investors to come to Hong Kong. They do contribute a lot, but not all of them would take roots in Hong Kong. As for the one-way permit holders, in the past they became the frontline workers, but the number has fallen drastically. Last year, only 21,000. So the most reliable source is locally born babies. They're born locally and their roots are here, and they have families, friends, relatives, and they have a strong sense of belongingness, and they're willing to shoulder the responsibilities, and they would be willing to settle down here. Now, we have an aging population. We have to count on our own children to keep our society as a whole. The government has got family-friendly measures, and the government has raised the child allowance for taxation, but then they're indirect. On the other hand, Singapore, our main competitor, has got professional immigration schemes. They've also got importation of labor. In addition, they've got other measures like childbearing holiday incentives, priority in getting public housing, assistance in assisted reproductive technology. Well, instead of 7,000 Singaporean dollars, it will be 11,000 Singaporean dollars. And if you have your third child, then you'll get even more cash incentives from the Singaporean government. Now, if your population size is too small, then the economy cannot function and prosper. Hong Kong is an exception. I think with a sufficient population size, we can develop our economy. We need a second generation that will take root here. So we should come up with more ways to encourage citizens to bear children. That's for our future's sake. Dr. Elizabeth Quart. I speak in support of Kenneth LEUNG's motion, and I thank him, and I support the amendments. At the 20th Party Congress, President Xi said that we need to come up with a system that would favor child rearing. We should also cut the cost for raising a family. Now, today, the total fertility rate has fallen to 0.77 in year 2021, the lowest. The aging problem is getting more and more serious. For those aged 65 or above, in 2021, it was 13%. In the year 2041, it will be 30%. So we need to come up with a comprehensive population policy. We need to help those who are interested in child rearing to have a favorable environment to give birth to new children. Many people want to have babies, but they dare not have children. There are many factors. Now, our female population have to take care of their family duties, and they have to work. If there's no assistance, then they dare not have children. If they don't have time, they don't have sufficient living space. It is indeed a very difficult choice to make up your mind to have children. Now, the Hong Kong government is saying that it is a family decision. There shouldn't be over-intervention. But all around the world, you can see that there are cash incentives, tax concessions, family-friendly initiatives, assistance in terms of reproductive technologies. Earlier on, Singapore came up with additional cash incentives. You get 65,000 Hong Kong dollars for your third child. So in order to keep the interest, I think you need to come up with more favorable policies, like having more child care services, providing a subsidy for child rearing, tax concessions, a more favorable environment for working mothers. Many people can't give birth to children. Why? This is because they want to develop their career at a younger age. They get married in their 30s if they are able to find their Mr. Right. It takes a year or two or a couple of years to save up money to prepare for the arrival of the children. So by that time, the fertility has dropped. So many more couples have to turn to assisted reproductive technologies like IVF, etc. But then they face different problems. First of all, for that in the public sector, the waiting time is indeed long. Do you know? Usually you have to wait 10, 13 months. You are in your 30s, you are anxious. Can you afford to wait a year's time? If you can't afford to wait, you turn to the private sector. You have to dig up $100,000 to $200,000. Ms. Nishi Lam has told us many times that it costs her $100,000 to $200,000. What about freezing your eggs? You have to come up with $60,000 to $100,000, and then you have to pay $10,000 per year to keep your eggs frozen. But you can only have it for 10 years. But then the government has also got a deadline for you to use your eggs, and probably by then you have already exceeded the deadline. It is said that there is little demand for such a service, but in fact that's not the case. In the year 2015 to year 2021, there was a 15 times growth in the number of eggs being frozen. Now, in the public sector, this is only available for the cancer patients, and you can keep it for 10 years. In Taiwan, there's no time limit at all. You can have it forever. So the government hasn't provided assistance to women so that they don't have anything to worry about. Well, this is causing a lot of problems in other areas as well. So it's high time for government to come up with a comprehensive policy. Education, housing, elderly services, immigration policies are all areas that you need to consider. I hope the government will consider our proposals. Madam Deputy, so I spoke. Mr. Robert Lee, for a good, comprehensive and long-term population policy, it should be done difficultly phased so that we can deal with the problem of an aging population and a low birth rate. We need to take care of the livelihood issues as well as the housing issues. I'm grateful to the members who moved the motion and proposed the amendments. Aging is the most serious population issue we are facing with. According to the Census and Statistics Department, for those aged 65 or above, the projection is that in the year 2022, that accounts for 20.8%, that will go up to 25.3% in the year 2028. For the UN Population Fund 2023 report, it is said that by the year 2050, 40.6% of our population will be aged 65 or above, ranking the first in the world, followed by South Korea, 39.4, and also Japan, 37.5. An aging population will mean fewer people working, a smaller workforce, and then it will also add to the medical bills for the society as a whole. It will have economic pressure on us. The UN has suggested that we have to provide better safeguards for the elderly. We should also remove or relax the retirement age. We should also help the elderly to continue to learn so as to ease the negative impacts arising from an aging population. We should consider that. I'm glad to see that the government is being proactive in attracting outside talents. There are a number of schemes to attract talents. There will also be a new capital investment immigration scheme. I know we are attracting young professionals to come to Hong Kong, and the investment scheme would also bring about more capital. I think we should provide a diversity of investment products. Many governments would like to use immigration programs to change their demographic structure. I think it is high time for us to attract more overseas Chinese to come to Hong Kong to develop their career. And they can also ride on the opportunities of the opening up of the mainland, given the geopolitical tensions at the moment. I think we should have more relevant courses at our tertiary institutions to enhance the talent pool. Now, we have a very low birth rate, and according to the UN Population Fund report, it is said that for our total fertility rate, we have the lowest. On average, a woman would only give birth to 0.8 baby, 0.9 in the case of South Korea, and 1.3 in Japan. To be effective in our proactive measures, maybe the government can come up with tax concessions and other economic incentives. Say, for example, further enhancing the child allowance for tax payment. There should be a progressive sort of a mechanism. The more children you have, the more allowances you should enjoy. There should also be a child care subsidy so as to ease the burden of the parents. There should be more child care facilities in the community. Like in the case of the Northern Metropolis, you should leave behind sufficient space for the community to provide childcare services so that working couples can have their children taken care of properly. For young people, we should encourage them and empower them to start a family early. The government should teach them how to manage their finances so that they can accumulate wealth early. And then there should be more job opportunities for the young people, and we should provide them with a diversity of choices. Thank you.
Mr. Duncan Chiu. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Kenneth Leung for moving the motion debate on formulating a comprehensive population policy. The changes in population structure in Hong Kong has led to aging population and many other problems, and members have already spoken on that and provided many recommendations on how to encourage birth rate. I support Mr. Leung's motion on formulating a comprehensive population policy. We must set up a more comprehensive policy, but then we need also to focus on a talent policy, because only by doing that can we enhance the competitiveness whilst enhancing the population structure and to ensure sustainable development in Hong Kong. Population is not one problem only. If we can actually link up talent and population together, then I'm sure that we'll be able to come up with a more comprehensive strategy. When setting policy, the government should consider 2 points. First, to know clearly about the economic implications, the import and migration of people, and then to also look into the economic structure to understand the changes in demographics, and also to look into the characteristics of Hong Kong to see what kind of measures would be most beneficial to the population policy. Many members have already talked about the birth rate, but the immigration policy is also an administrative means used by many other countries. The government is working very hard towards competing for talents. We have seen lots of popularity in the Top Talent Pass scheme, and we have also looked into other policies in retaining talents. I hope that we'll be able to attract overseas and mainland funds into Hong Kong, and also to introduce more talents into Hong Kong to fill up the population gap in Hong Kong. I hope that when the government look into the details in attracting top talents, other than some of the current strategies to provide support. For example, providing better education for the families they bring along and to provide them with housing opportunities. We also need to look into the job opportunities for the top talents to see whether there is a match in opportunities and jobs, and to ensure that these people can stay after 2 years. Will they actually bring along their families to make Hong Kong their home? This is something we need to pay close attention to. And for those that immigrate to Hong Kong, we also hope that the funds they bring along can help with the economic development. Of course, I hope that they could also invest in the technological investment. I look forward to the government giving us more details on the asset investment scheme to let us know what the requirements are. This not only helps us formulate a better policy, it can also help in Hong Kong becoming a hub for innovation and technology, to ensure that we will be able to provide more support. Other than immigration, we also need to focus on the nurturing of local talents. In Innotech development, currently the focus is on AI and medical sector. Do we have enough courses at the tertiary institutions to cater for such demand? Do we also have disciplines in the study of genome sequencing? Can we actually provide the support needed? Well, in order to implement what President Xi said on July 1st, we must ensure the uniqueness of Hong Kong, and to continue with our development, we must look into the population policy in the future. I hope that there will be more attention paid to the population and the matching of job opportunities. Dr. Johnny Ng. Thank you. I would like to speak in support of the original motion and the amendments. Faced with a declining birth rate and rapidly aging population, and with immigration, we see that there's huge change in the demographics. Therefore, the government must come up with concrete policy to ensure that the economy can be competitive and also see a sustainable development. I have once suggested that we should be people-oriented. We need to enhance our workforce, and first of all, we must formulate a comprehensive population policy. Last year, population is around 7.29 million, compared to mid-2021 at 7.41 million. That's actually a decrease of around 171,000, so that's actually a drop of 1.6%. And these figures can actually help with the government in formulating strategies in education and housing. Statistics show that there actually should be population of 7.6 million last year, and by 2024 there should be 7.8 million. But then at the estimates of last year, there was actually a drop of around 100,000 people, and we seen a shortage of young people in the labor force. In fact, Hong Kong must ensure its economic development in the next few years and need to make economic transition to meet the shortfall of labor. In 2018, there were about 4 million people in the labor force, but nowadays there's only 3.78 million. There's actually a decrease of about 200,000. So we've also seen that immigration has also led to a decrease of around 140,000. There is actually not yet a policy to encounter these problems, and there's actually a mention of a tax concession in children, which is actually not attractive to encouraging birth rate. Faced with all these challenges, and to open up the development of innovation and technology, we must set up a strong structure and formulate a comprehensive population policy. Compared to the GBA, we see that the GBA is working towards city cluster development. The SAR government must look into the population and demographics of Hong Kong and try to improve the population structure and to attract young people and those who are highly educated to come into Hong Kong to bring along economic development. Increasing women in the labor force is also another focus we should look into. Many women have to take care of children and are unable to join the workforce. The government must provide more support for working women so that we can actually increase productivity. Lastly, I must once again remind the government that the population policy is not only limited to those who are in Hong Kong. I once raised to the Chief Administration that we should actually also look into virtual citizens and not only to focus on the physical citizens. For example, on certain trends and sectors, we could look into attracting the digital nomads to move into Hong Kong. We could also provide them with visas to move into Hong Kong. Mr. Yim Kong. Thank you, President. I speak in support of Mr. Kenneth LEUNG's motion and the other amendments moved by members. Population policy is a very important factor on economic development. I think that in promoting young people development and also encouraging the birth rate are actually very important factors. Hong Kong is an international metropolis. We should look into how we can position ourselves in the international arena, especially to try to set up a population policy that can cater to our development. I'd like to focus on a few points. First of all, to consider the implications on the economy, to set up a long-term policy. Well, when everyone is focusing on innovation and technology, AI can substitute part of the labor force, enhancing productivity. I'm sure that AI in future will replace more of the labor force. Therefore, the population policy must also consider technological development, making changes to the labor force and come up with better estimates for the labor force in its setting of a long-term policy to ensure that we'll be able to promote a smart city. So other than nurturing talents, we also need to nurture local talents. Secondly, to encourage birth rate. According to report and studies, 70% of interviewees refuse to have children because of its huge financial implications. 55% of them believe that housing is a major cause. The SAR government can draw reference from overseas. For example, in Singapore, they have set out a series of incentives. In 2021, a report in Singapore shows that a couple with two children, when the children meet the year of 13, then they can actually receive a subsidy of up to around 910,000 Hong Kong dollars. The research also shows that compared to 21 birth rate, the Singapore's birth rate has actually increased. It shows that these incentives do work. The SAR government can also consider providing for those with two children or above with housing concessions or subsidies, and for those with 3 children and who are in the grassroots can actually be awarded with public housing. And thirdly, to encourage women to return to the workforce after giving birth. There's actually a lot of pressure on women in Hong Kong. Many of them are worried that they would lose their positions or jobs after bearing children. And some believe that they will need to return to take care of their families. There are around 400,000 women who are actually taking care of their families, and many of them are actually highly educated. The government should formulate policies to provide more child care centers and after school care, and to provide more incentives to encourage women to return to the workforce after giving birth to meet the labor shortage. Fourthly, the population policy should work with the country's development. We should look into the 7 main focus, and we'll need to look into the 8 universities to come up with curriculum and courses that can match the future needs of Hong Kong. For example, to train up and nurture more high-tech talents and to help with industrial transition. The central government has already relaxed its one-child policy because they believe that intervention and adjustment made to the population policy can help with the aging population. Hong Kong should also encourage bearing children and also to attract talents to come into Hong Kong to meet the needs of Hong Kong. President, these are all important considerations for our future population policy.
Mr. Tony Tse. Thank you, President. First, I thank Mr. Kenneth Leung from G19 for moving this motion on formulating a comprehensive population policy. The last term of the Legislative Council, we did not have the black-clad violence, COVID, and the immigration wave yet. Back then, people worried we would see a population explosion that will cause for a smaller quota for one-way permit. But at that point, I said there was a falling birth rate and we would see a worsening shrinkage in the labor force. I asked a senior government official for a full review of the population policy. And then I was told there was no comprehensive population policy. So there was no way to enhance what was non-existent. And then there was the black-clad violence, there was COVID. And then living standards in the mainland have gone up, so there's less incentive for people to come to Hong Kong. And then there are Hong Kong residents who have left Hong Kong for various reasons. So we have seen a net drop in our population for 2 years in a row. There's a staff shortage across sectors. Last year, G19 submitted a submission to the government on talent and manpower. We made 13 recommendations. Many of them have to do with attracting talent, and they have been adopted. On the population policy, though, the government has yet to face up to the issue. Population issue touches on a wide range of matters. You can spend hours on end, and we can keep talking about it. So I will focus on 4 action plans. First, we need to stop the outflow and the drop in population and talent. As Ms. Yu was saying, we need to attract outside talent and keep our local talent. We need to retain our professionals. We also need to step up training of talent. I hope the universities can do their part in this. Second, we need to take a range of measures to boost the local birth rate. We need financial and other material incentives. We also need family-friendly workplaces, easy to access childcare services. These are key to encouraging young couples to have kids. The amendments from members have covered this, so I will not go into those in detail. Third, we have an aging population and a shrinking labor force. Members' amendments have also mentioned making good use of gerund technology to improve seniors' quality of life. I mentioned in terms of building design and urban planning, they need to go hand in hand with measures to improve seniors' quality of life. On bringing in imported labor, We have had a lengthy discussion of that in the community. It's time to act on this. We cannot afford more indecision and inaction. And the fourth point is, how do we get emigrated Hong Kong residents to come back? For those supporters of black-clad violence and Hong Kong independence, we don't want them back. But then over the years, we also had Hong Kong permanent residents, patriotic people. They left Hong Kong for overseas places. They experienced for themselves the problems of living overseas, high inflation, high taxes, and an environment that is not as fair and free as they thought it would be. Some of them or their children may want to come back to Hong Kong and contribute to our development. We need to get these people to come back to work and live here. So we need housing, taxes, and education for children. These are key matters for consideration. The government needs to launch suitable measures to help these people. President, I so submit. I support the original motion and all the amendments. Mr. Frankie Yik. President, our population will keep aging. 20 years from now, half of the population will be over the age of 50. Aging population, a low birth rate, that means a shrinking labor force. For many sectors, especially those requiring technical expertise, they have an aging population force and succession issues. Without the comprehensive population issue from the government, without the human resources to support the development of those sectors, we will not be able to give effect to the proposals under the 14th Five-Year Plan, being the 8 centers, and we will have a hard time developing in the future. Before we have a comprehensive population policy, we need clear directions and goals for our future development. That's how we can tell the kind of talent we need and the number of workers we need, and then we can get the education we need to support the development of various sectors. To strengthen our role as an aviation center, shipping center, we need repair mechanics for aircraft and vessels. At the airport, we have a long-standing shortage of ground crew that also hurts the service quality. How can we develop into an aviation hub given that problem? The government needs to review how we can ensure we have enough human resources to support the development of different sectors. Human resources are a key part of the development of different sectors. We have a persistent drop in the birth rate. We also have a talent loss. Recently, there's a UN report. Hong Kong has the lowest birth rate across the globe. Over the past 3 years, we have the wave of emigration. We have lost over 190,000 workers. The policy address proposes various measures to bring in firms, capital, and talent. We have expanded the talent list. For certain professions, we have dedicated labor importation schemes. But then for some job posts, especially for those that require a long time in training, the government puts local workers first so that we can pass on the skills. So importing labor is simply a band-aid. In the long run, the government needs to take a range of measures to boost the local labor force. To encourage childbearing, the government proposes a $10,000 increase in the child's allowance, but that's not very meaningful. As said, based on information from the Economist think tank last year, in terms out of 170 or so cities, Hong Kong came fourth in terms of unaffordable living. We have high costs of living, and that's one of the reasons behind the low birth rate. To give a stronger incentive to middle-class families to have kids, the Liberal Party proposes support measures on 3 fronts. In terms of childbearing and child rearing, Mr. Tommy Chung will discuss this. We propose a progressive child allowance. So the more kids a family has, the more tax breaks they have. And in terms of education, we propose a more flexible education voucher scheme. That way, parents will have more flexibility in choosing the education for their kids. Childbearing hinges on many factors. The government needs to analyze reasons and take a targeted approach. In 2013, there was a population consultation paper Now, there was a need to review the positioning of vocational education, but when we don't see any improvement in the mismatch of skills and the skills we need and the skills we have, the mismatch has to do with the overemphasis on academics. We encourage people to enter universities, we ignore the interest. So people graduate and they have a hard time finding a job, and there's a drop in wages. This breeds discontent among young people about society. This mismatch leads to a result where we have unemployed people coexisting alongside vacancies where no one's filling them. So we need to fix this, meet the needs of the market, and starting from senior secondary school, we need to strengthen life planning for students so that students know what's happening across sectors and know where they can grow. President, I so submit, I support the motions and the amendment. Mrs. Regina Ip. Thank you, President. I speak in support